Let's imagine the impossible. 5 modern tanks suddenly appear on the 13th century steppes, directly in the path of Genghis Khan's army of approximately 50,000 horsemen. There is no air support, no supplies, only a full complement of ammunition and crews accustomed to 21st century warfare. Before them lies an ocean of cavalry, disciplined and seasoned by dozens of campaigns. The Mongols see strange steel fortresses on the horizon, moving without horses and emitting a dull metallic roar. Scouts report to the Khan, unknown chariots, covered in smooth iron, unlike any Chinese or Persian machine. The 5 tanks take up position on a small hill. The commanders understand, their main advantage is distance and shock. The Mongols are accustomed to archery at 100 to 150 meters, maneuvering, and encirclement. But a 125 mm cannon can shoot for kilometers. Thermal imagers see living targets as bright silhouettes. For a nomadic army, this is magic. For tankers, it's routine. Genghis Khan gives the order to probe the enemy. 10,000 horsemen advance, forming a crescent. They are certain that before them are just a few strange wagons, ready to be showered with arrows. None of them knows that in a few minutes, the steppe will turn into a fiery hell, and their usual tactics will crumble like dust under treads. 5 tanks against 50,000, madness on paper, but technology changes the very rules of war. The first shot shatters the silence as if the sky itself had cracked. A high-explosive fragmentation shell lands in the center of the forward Tuman. Where a dense mass of cavalry had just been, a black crater and dozens of bodies appear. The horses go wild, the formation breaks. The Mongols had never encountered a weapon that killed not with an arrow or a spear, but with an invisible thunderclap. 5 tanks begin firing in turns, conserving ammunition. Rangefinders lock onto new targets, automatic guns guide the most densely packed riders. Every 6 seconds, another explosion. The nomads try their usual tactic, split up, encircle the enemy, and rain down arrows. But the arrows clang powerlessly against the armor, leaving only scratches on the reactive armor. Genghis Khan changes tactics. He orders attacks from all sides, using the smoke from campfires, driving the herds forward to blind the enemy with dust. The 5 tanks find themselves in the center of a growing whirlwind of thousands of horses. But thermal imagers penetrate the smoke, and stabilized cannons fire even on the move. For the crews, it's like a training exercise with endless targets. For the Mongols, it's the end of the familiar world. The ground trembles from the tracks and explosions. 5 machines against 50,000 men begin to dictate their own rules. For the first time in decades, the army of the steppe cannot understand how to win. An hour later, the battlefield is unrecognizable. Where the orderly ranks of the Tumans once stood, now lies a torn steppe. But the Mongols are not an army that flees after the first losses. Their strength lies in tenacity and numbers. The commanders decide to attack logically. If the iron monsters cannot be penetrated, they must be immobilized. Thousands of horsemen with ropes, hooks, and spears drive forward, an attempt to entangle the tracks and overwhelm the vehicles with their weight. 5 tanks switch to machine guns. Bursts of fire mow down the most desperate waves, but there are too many men, 50,000 against 5 crews. 1 tank receives dozens of hits to the chassis, and riders leap onto the armor, trying to pour tar on it, set it on fire, and blind the instruments. It all looks like a pure clash of 2 eras, the steel of the industrial age versus the fury of a nomadic empire. The tank commanders understand, the main enemy isn't arrows, but time and ammunition. Every shell is worth its weight in gold. They begin to fire not at the crowd, but at command centers, the Khan's tents, the communication centers, the banners. Psychology is stronger than armor. When leaders fall, so does will. 5 machines against 50,000 begin a war of nerves. The Mongols still believe they can overwhelm the enemy with numbers, but the steppe is already filled with doubt and fear. For the first time, the Mongols encounter something unknown to any army of their era: invisible death. Tanks shift positions every few minutes, preventing the encirclement from closing. Their treads crush arrows, spears, and bodies, turning the ground into a bloody mess. 5 vehicles act as a single organism. 1 tank covers the reload of another, a third holds the distant approaches, and 2 more work the flanks. The Khan's nukers try to exploit the night. With the onset of dusk, the Mongols are accustomed to becoming masters of the field, but thermal imaging cameras transform darkness into day. The horsemen, confident in their stealth, suddenly realize that to the steel monsters, they glow like torches. Genghis Khan orders the prisoners and herds to be driven forward, to form a human shield. This worked against Chinese crossbows, but not against a stabilized cannon. The shells pass through any barrier. 5 tanks against 50,000 begin to resemble the invulnerable demons of steppe legend. But the crews are tired. The ventilation is clogged with dust, the barrels are overheating, the ammunition is running low. For the first time, the thought occurs, even gods can drown in a sea of people. By midnight, the field turns into a labyrinth of flames. Wagons, supply yurts, and arrow stockpiles are burning. The tank crews begin to target logistics. They understand that the Mongol army relies not only on warriors, but on thousands of horses and supplies. One well-aimed shot at a herd, and an entire corps is left without a chance to maneuver. The Mongols respond inventively. Nomadic engineers dig pits, stretch chains between wagons, trying to trap their tracks. The 5 tanks move slowly, scanning the ground with searchlights. Any stop could be fatal. At one point, an avalanche of horsemen descends on one of the tanks. They try to crush it with their bodies. The vehicle spins in place, crushing the men, the machine gun glowing red-hot. This is no longer a battle, but a primal clash of metal against metal. 5 tanks against 50,000 are beginning to pay the price of every minute. The armor is intact, but the war of attrition is just beginning. The morning of the second day. The original 50,000 are reduced, but the army is still enormous. The Mongols are beginning to understand the enemy structure. They see that there are only 5 iron machines. Faith in their numerical superiority returns. Khan orders a decisive assault from all directions. The tanks begin to conserve ammunition. Now every shot is fired only at commanders and dense formations. The radios inside the tanks are jammed with short commands: left flank, overheating, last belt. The men inside understand that this is a siege, only in reverse. The Mongols use whistles and drums, coordinating tens of thousands of men against 5 points. Never in history has such disproportionate numbers converged in direct combat. From the hilltop, the tanks look like islands in a sea of humanity. 5 tanks against 50,000, a formula that should have ended in minutes, but has been going on for a day. And no one knows where the limit is. The decisive wave washes over the tanks by midday. The Mongols are no longer advancing chaotically, now it's a calculated storm. Thousands of spare horses are driven ahead, followed by dense ranks of archers, followed by shock troops with spears. The plan is simple: force the tanks to fire non-stop, overheat their barrels, and drown them in the mass. The 5 tanks respond calmly. One fires only at the distant commanders, the second cuts off the flank, the third takes control of the center. Shells fall in chains, as if a giant is drawing a fiery line across the steppe. For the first time, Mongolians see hundreds of people disappear in seconds. But numbers take their toll. Men climb onto the armor again, cloaks are thrown over the equipment, spears are thrust into crevices. One tank loses its visibility for a moment, dozens of horsemen immediately fire at it. The crew fires back blindly, navigating by body heat. 5 tanks against 50,000 become 5 separate fortresses, each waging its own small war within the vast slaughterhouse. At one point, the Mongols almost achieve a miracle. One of the tanks falls into a deep pit dug during the night. The vehicle freezes, and the horde pounces on it like a pack of wolves on a wounded animal. Ropes wrap around the tracks, hammers are pounded on the armor, and burning resin is poured on it. The remaining 4 tanks turn to cut a corridor to their comrade. They fire at point-blank range, tearing apart their own encirclement. Explosions are so close that shrapnel rings against their own hulls. This is no longer a classic battle, but a rescue operation in the midst of an ancient apocalypse. A stuck tank breaks free from the trap, crushing people and carts. The Mongols see for the first time that even their most cunning tactics can fail. But the crew's joy is short-lived, their ammunition supply drops below half. 5 tanks against 50,000 are tactically victorious, but strategically they begin to tire faster than an endless river of humanity. Genghis Khan holds a council. His commanders admit, a direct assault is not working. The solution is radical: to turn the battle into a siege. The army withdraws, encircling the area with a ring tens of kilometers long. Let the iron demons die of hunger and empty fuel tanks. For the first time in 2 days, the tankers are given a brief pause. They count the remains, less than a third of their shells, limited fuel, and the machine gun belts are running low. 5 tanks against 50,000 no longer seem like an invincible formula. The Mongols build camps, light fires, and keep their vehicles under constant surveillance. Any attempt to break through is met with an avalanche of arrows and bodies. The war turns into a chess match between the engine and the patience of the nomads. Genghis Khan sees the approach of the steel monsters with his own eyes. His entourage demands a retreat, but he remains. For the steppe, this is the moment of truth, a man who has conquered half the world against 5 machines from the future. Tanks strike the center of the camp. Yurts fly into the air, banners fall. For a second, it seems as if history could break right here, beneath their treads. 5 tanks against 50,000 approach the point where the fate of an entire era is decided. The ending is not as in the legends. The tanks do not become gods, and the Mongols do not turn into a helpless mob. One of the crews runs out of fuel and becomes an immobile pillbox. The other 4 retreat, conserving their last resources. Genghis Khan survives, but his army will never be the same. Of 50,000, only a fraction is combat ready. New myths are born on the steppe, about iron spirits that cannot be killed by an arrow. The Mongols learned to fear technology, not people. 5 tanks against 50,000 did not destroy the empire, but they changed the very concept of war. In this impossible battle, there was no absolute victor, only a clash of times that tore apart familiar reality. History diverges into 2 lines, the world of the 13th century and the shadow of the future, left in the ashes of the steppe.